charge extra for that.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. So last week we spoke about the concept of arvut. We spoke about making Kiddush for somebody else. I'm going to take it one step further this evening. Look at a very interesting question that comes up. So we spoke about the fact that if you have two people who don't have the same level chiyuv, all other things being equal, one who has a lesser chiyuv could not fulfill the mitzvah on behalf of someone who has a greater chiyuv. So that's why a katan who is only mechuyav in certain mitzvot to Rabbanan cannot fulfill for a gadol who is mechuyav midoraita. And similarly, we spoke about the case whereby a man goes to shul, has fulfilled, according to those opinions, has fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush deoraita, and then only has a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. How can he then fulfill the mitzvah for somebody, for a woman at home who has the obligation d'oraita? And we said that's why without the concept of arvut, it wouldn't work. But we invoked that principle. But everybody agrees that if you have a mitzvah where one individual is not obligated at all, then they can't be fulfilled on behalf of somebody else. So take an example, Tkiyat Shofar, right, which is a positive time-bound mitzvah. So therefore, a woman who is not obligated in that mitzvah cannot fulfill it on behalf of a man who is obligated in that mitzvah. So here comes the following question. So this was asked in a number of different contexts. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach addresses this in Mincha Shlomo. It was asked the following. A certain person who goes on Friday nights would go to a hospital and go around making Kiddush. Different people, different cholim were unable to make Kiddush for themselves. The person would go around Friday evening, make a Kiddush in different wards, and then go home, right? Walk home afterwards and make Kiddush at home, have his meal with his family. The hospital moved. The hospital moved premises, moved somewhere else where it was no longer in walking distance from his home. But he wants to carry on doing the mitzvah, wants to carry on doing the chesed. So his question was, can he go on Friday afternoon after Plag HaMincha, right? So for the cholim in hospital, it's already, they would be accepting Shabbat early, and he would go and he would make Kiddush on their behalf when it's Shabbat for them. If it's not Shabbat for them, there's no meaning to making Kiddush. However, since again, this is before Shkia, he doesn't want to accept Shabbat yet. So for him, it's not Shabbat, but for them it is Shabbat. Can he make Kiddush on their behalf? Okay, that's the question. So there are two sides to this, obviously. Probably more. Yeah.
How can he do that? Since they either they're not really the couple shops. They're going to still do even fruit people until they light candles. They're going to light candles later.
No, it's not the Plag HaMincha. They've lit candles. For them, it's Shabbos. For them, the point. For them, it's Shabbos. No question. Summertime, wintertime, whatever you want, whenever it is. But the point is, it's after Plag HaMincha. It's before Natal. They've accepted Shabbos. For them, it is Shabbos. No question. But for him, it's not. So the question is, can I, if it's not Shabbat yet for me, although it could be, right? Can I make Kiddush on your behalf to help you fulfill the mitzvah? So one side is to say, look, at the end of the day, it's going to be Shabbat. I'm obligated in Shabbat as much as you are, although I haven't brought it in yet. And therefore we have our vote, we have the concept, I can fulfill the mitzvah for you. That's one side. The other side of the argument is, wait a minute. Right now, in this situation, it's not Shabbat for the one making Kiddush. It's not Shabbat for me. I don't have the chiyuv. Therefore, how can I come along and fulfill the mitzvah? Right? Those would be the two sides of and that essentially is the question. That's the question that was posed. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was posed to the Tzitz Eliezer, was posed to Rav Ovadia. Many poskim deal with this. So before those achronim, right? The first question we can ask is: do we have a precedent for this? Do we have a similar situation in halakha whereby, again, it's trying to understand what our question is, whereby you have an individual who, in a general sense, is mechuyav in this mitzvah, right? The same as somebody else. But right now, I don't have the chiyuv. You have the chiyuv right now. I don't have the chiyuv right now, but I am part of the general chiyuv. So one precedent, which Rabbi Akiva Eiger finds, he says we have this by Purim. It's precisely the case. We have Purim. We have 2 days of Purim. We have Purim the Prazim or Purim the Mukafim. In Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael, people are more familiar with it. In Chutz La'aretz, it's Hilchot HaMashiach. Right? In Chutz La'aretz, everywhere keeps Yud Dalet. There's 1 day. Yeah, somewhere in Jerusalem they have this minhag. They keep Purim on the 2nd day. But that's, as we know, we're all in Yerushalayim HaKodesh. The rest of the world keeps Purim on Yud Dalet. walled cities from the time of Yoshua ben Nun, and best of my knowledge, the only city today that we know for certain. There are other places which keep Tetvav out of Safek, out of a doubt. But where we know for certain this was a walled city since the time of Yoshua ben Nun, and therefore Purim is only on Tetvav, is Yerushalayim. So the Yerushalmi asks the following question, right? You have somebody who's a Ben Ir or a Ben Krach, right? Somebody who lives in Yerushalayim is obligated in the mitzvah of Purim only on the day of Tetvav. Somebody who lives in Tel Aviv, let's say, is obligated in this mitzvah only on the day of Yud Daled. So now, both individuals are obligated in the mitzvah. They both have the chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, but not at the same time. You see the parallel to our case. So can one who is a Ben Ir, right? If he goes to the Krach on Yud Daled, can he read the Megillah and therefore fulfill the mitzvah for those people who have the chiyuv on that day, on Yud Daled, even though on that day he doesn't? The Yerushalmi says, no, you can't do it. You don't have the same chiyuv. Right now, today, it's not your chiyuv. Today it's Yud Daled. For you, it's not Purim. For them, it's Purim. And they need to hear the Megillah. But for you, it's not. You can't fulfill the mitzvah on their behalf.
I don't get it. Because let them make the bracha and he reads the Megillah. So what's the problem? You're not over on anything?
But you can't fulfill the mitzvah.
I don't have to fulfill it. All I'm doing is reading it to them. Let that they are Yosef.
No, but that's exactly the question. They're not Yotzei. They're not Yotzei because you're not part of the mitzvah today. You're not included. So that's the one side. So that Rabbi Akiva Eiger brings that. He brings that Yerushalmi, and he says based on that we could extrapolate from that case of Purim, extrapolate from there across to our case regarding Shabbat. In the same sense, now it's not Shabbat for you. You're making Kiddush. It's Shabbat for them, but you're not part of it. One doesn't like that.
The cases aren't similar. You can accept Shabbos if you're willing to, and that would be the solution. By Purim, there's no chiyuv whatsoever, so that's why.
Yafeh mod. So that's why Rabbi Akiva Eiger leaves with a tzarich here. He says that's the side, that's the difference. Because, sorry? Right. So what he said was that the difference between the two cases, on Purim, you don't have a chiyuv. Your chiyuv is on Yud Daled or on Tetvav, and now it's not your chiyuv at all. But by Shabbat, right, every moment the person, although I haven't yet accepted Shabbat, I could now accept Shabbat, and I could belong in that chiyuv. At any moment, if I chose to, I could accept it, and therefore I would still be included. And that's why it's not conclusive one way or the other. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says it's a tzarich iyun. Yeah.
If the person who's Yerushalmi goes to Tel Aviv, but sleeps in Tel Aviv that night, then he's Mekuyev.
Right. So
he is. You can.
But not right now. Meaning it's going to depend.
No, it's the same thing that he said as far as Shabbos. Right now, you're not.
So first of all, it depends which case we talk about. If we take the case of if it's already on Tetvav and it's already been Yudad, then you may not be able to. But the point is, even if he can, we can discuss. It's something that's going to depend on what he does later. It's going to depend on what he does the next day. But it's not right now. At that moment, you could be part of that chiyuv. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach brings another case where he says maybe we can answer the suffix in the following way. It says Tosfot says regarding brachot. Okay, we've been dealing now, fulfilling the mitzvah for somebody else, saying the bracha for somebody else. That's what we spoke about last week as well in terms of arvut. That I've already fulfilled the mitzvah, yet I can still come and say the bracha again. It's not a bracha levatala because somebody else needs it. So the Gemara says that din that you can say the bracha for somebody else, it's regarding Birkot HaMitzvah. We don't say that regarding Birkot HaNe'anim. Right? Somebody is about to take a bite of a cucumber, and I don't intend to eat. I can't say Borei Pri Adama on their behalf because that's different. There I have there's no chiyuv to eat the cucumber. Right? Birkot HaNe'anim, that a person doesn't want to get the benefit, they don't have to say the bracha. As opposed to Birkot HaMitzvot, but the person has to do it, has to fulfill the mitzvah, and therefore I can say the bracha on their behalf. But Tosfot says, when it comes to Birkat HaMazon, Birkat HaMazon, which is the only bracha, which according to everybody is a bracha midoraita from the Torah. According to many poskim, Birkat HaTorah are also midoraita, although some say it's midrabanan. But according to everybody, v'achalta v'savata v'rachta Hashem Elokecha, right? With Birkat HaMazon, when a person is eaten and satisfied, that is a chiyuv doraita to say Birkat HaMazon. Says Tosfot, you could say Birkat HaMazon on behalf of somebody else, even if you haven't eaten. But we just said, when it comes to Birkat HaNe'anin, you can't say it for somebody else. Birkat HaMitzvot, yes. Birkat HaMazon says Tosfot, you can say it on their behalf. Why? So he explains that at any moment you could be part of that chiyuv, right? You could, just like we said now regarding Shabbat, the same thing, that at any moment right now, I don't have the chiyuv of the mitzvah of Birkat HaMazon, but if I was to eat, I would also have the mitzvah of Birkat HaMazon, and therefore I can go and I can include myself in that chiyuv. Based on that idea, we might say that the same thing, Friday night, you want to make Kiddush the same way. I'm not mechuyev now. I haven't accepted Shabbat. I could accept Shabbat. Same way that I could eat, and then I could be part of the Birkat HaMazon. So maybe that Tosfot, regarding Birkat HaMazon, is a proof that the person could make Kiddush for somebody when he hasn't yet accepted. However, we could argue against that as well. And there's the difference. What's the difference between the two cases? The difference is Birkat HaMazon, right? At any day, in any moment, any time that a person wants to eat, they can eat. And at that point, the chiyuv of Birkat HaMazon is something that's there whenever I eat, at any day, right? Regarding Shabbat, it's limited. It's not that at any moment, at any time, a person can include themselves. And it's only once they've taken in Shabbat, and they can only do that within a certain amount of time. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to my son. You know that you can say Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol, the end of Shabbat. You can do Malacha before you've heard Havdalah. So he says, so at 2:00 in the afternoon, can I say Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol? And I said, no, it doesn't quite work that way, right? Same thing when Shabbat comes in, right? A person at 12 in the afternoon decides to say, I'm bringing Shabbat. It's meaningless. It's not. It's only after Plaga Mincha. So that chiyuv is not always there. The chiyuv of Birkat HaMazon would always be there if you'd eaten. The chiyuv of Shabbat would only be there within that time period, and therefore it's limited. So therefore, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, after a long Masa Matan between all of these points, the conclusion that he comes to is that as a general rule, as a general course of practice, this should be avoided, i.e. one making Kiddush for other people when he himself has not accepted Shabbat. He says it should be avoided. He says in Shat HaDchak, as a one-off, in an extenuating circumstance, there is what to rely on. Although he recommends not to use it. And he says, as amazing Kiddush, he says, in this case, there's a simpler answer. He says the person could come, again, this is all before Shkiach, before he's accepted Shabbat. But he says the person could come, could make Kiddush, could accept Shabbat, and then they could go back, they could drive back with somebody else, so long as they avoid doing any malacha, and that person drives them back, and they could go for this sake of a mitzvah, especially where there's no one else to make the Kiddush, etc. That's what he allows. Other poskim, the Tzitz Eliezer, who I mentioned before, is much more open to the idea of not accepting Shabbat and making Kiddush on those people's behalf. Again, because it's being done for cholim, it's being done in the sake of a mitzvah where nobody else can do it, either based on the fact that he could accept Shabbat at any point, theoretically, or because we say that in general terms, he's part of the mitzvah, he's part of the chiyuv, and therefore that would suffice to fulfill the mitzvah on their behalf. Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha, Meretz, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Zakot Yisrael, if you talk about him, mitzvot, Shnei Adonai Chavetz Man Tzidko,